Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, I bring you the next video in the ongoing story of Hung, Hawa, Tieu San, continuing after the emotionally charged events of the previous episode. In the last episode, viewers witnessed the shocking return of the biological mother, the woman who had abandoned Hung and Tieu San nearly 30 years ago. Their brief encounter took place in what seemed like an ordinary cafe, yet it carried the heavy weight of a long-forgotten past. Standing before that woman, Hung neither avoided her nor lashed out in anger. Instead, he chose to face her directly and honestly. He made it clear that he no longer expected any form of compensation, nor did he want her belated reappearance to disrupt the current lives of himself and Tieu San. He asked her to stop, to consider everything between them as something that had ended long ago. That moment seemed like a final period to a bond that had been broken for decades. Hung left the cafe with a heavy yet resolute heart, while the woman remained seated in silence, her eyes filled with unspoken thoughts. It felt as though their story had finally reached its end, that the past, once named, would at last remain still. But no. That return turned out to be only the beginning. Before the aftershocks of that meeting had time to settle, another day arrived, one when life in Hung's household appeared to continue as usual. Hung left for work early that morning, just as he always did. The house was left with only Hawa inside, tending to her familiar daily routines. The quiet was so complete that she could hear even the smallest sounds, the steady ticking of the wall clock, the soft breeze slipping through the doorway. Then, the doorbell rang, cutting through her thoughts. Hawa felt slightly surprised, as visitors at that hour were rare. When she opened the door, she found herself facing a well-dressed woman with an elegant appearance. The woman's posture was composed, her eyes sharp yet concealed behind a polite smile. The way she stood at the gate, the way her gaze drifted into the house, gave Hawa the strange feeling that this woman already knew the place well, despite this likely being their first face-to-face meeting. Maintaining courtesy, Hawa invited the woman inside. Their conversation began with a few brief, seemingly harmless pleasantries. The woman asked about Hung, whether he was often home, about the family's current life. Hawa answered cautiously, sensing that something far from simple lay hidden behind that calm gaze. Without lingering too long, the woman suddenly shifted her tone. She looked straight at Hawa, speaking slowly but firmly. She said she had not come as an ordinary visitor. She then revealed that she was the biological mother of Hung and Tieu San. Those words cut straight through the once quiet air. Hawa froze, her entire body stiffening. In that brief moment, she could barely react, everything around her seemed to blur. She stared at the woman before her, searching her eyes for any sign that this was a misunderstanding, or perhaps a cruel joke spoken at the wrong time. All the years she had lived beside Hung, Hawa had believed that his mother had passed away long ago. It was a part of his life he rarely spoke of, and when he did, his words were always brief and closed off. She had never doubted it, never imagined that behind that silence lay a completely different truth. And so, hearing this now, Hawa was not only shocked, she felt as though everything she thought she knew about Hung's past was being overturned. She stood motionless, her hands unconsciously clenching, her eyes never leaving the woman before her. Countless questions raced through her mind, yet not a single one could find its way into words. She did not know whether to believe or to doubt, nor how she should react to such an overwhelming revelation delivered within her own home. The air in the room grew heavy, as if the house itself were sharing in her shock, silently waiting for whatever would be said next. The woman spoke at length. She talked continuously, barely leaving room for interruption. She spoke of the years gone by, of the wrong decisions she had made in her youth, of the circumstances that had driven her to leave back then. At times her voice grew low and heavy, at other times it trembled as if she were struggling to hold her emotions in check. She spoke of the regret that had followed her all these years, saying that not a single day had passed without her thinking about the 2 children she had left behind. Then she spoke of her desire to make amends, to do something, anything, even if it was long overdue, to atone for the mistakes of the past. But for Hawa, none of those words brought the relief or sympathy the woman seemed to hope for. On the contrary, they felt like invisible blades, slowly cutting into the sense of peace that her family had spent so many years building. What the woman shared was not only Hung and Tieu-san's past, but also pieces of a story Hawa had never known, never mentally prepared herself to face. With every sentence spoken, the familiar house began to feel strangely foreign, as though a solid foundation beneath her feet had suddenly been shaken. Hawa sat there, her hands resting on her knees, her back straight yet her body tense. She had no idea how she was supposed to react. Her mind was a tangled mess of thoughts, shock, confusion, anxiety, and a vague fear that the stability they had known for so long might no longer remain intact. She did not dare make any decisions on her own, because this was not just her story. It was Hung's past, a deep wound he had carried for years, and it was also Tieu-san's life, a girl who had always believed her mother had died long ago. And so, Hawa could only listen in silence. She did not interrupt, did not argue, and did not make any promises. Her silence was not agreement, but the result of being unable to sort through her own emotions yet. Inside her, everything was in turmoil, like hundreds of tangled threads pulled tight together. The more she tried to unravel them, the more complicated they became. She only knew that this situation was far beyond anything she could handle on her own in such a brief moment. The conversation ended in a heavy, oppressive atmosphere. The woman left, leaving behind a house that looked unchanged on the surface, yet in truth was no longer the same. Hawa stood at the doorway for a long time, watching the woman's figure fade into the distance, her heart weighed down by nameless thoughts. That evening, when Hung came home from work, Hawa could no longer keep the matter to herself. During their simple, familiar dinner, she told him everything, about the biological mother's visit, from the moment the woman appeared at the door to the words she spoke about her identity and the past. Hawa tried to keep her voice steady, but at times her unease and worry still surfaced. As she spoke, she watched Hung closely, half expecting something, half fearing what might come next. Hung did not look surprised. He simply fell silent. In that moment, Hawa could clearly sense a change in him. Hung did not question her repeatedly, nor did he react with confusion or anger as she had imagined. He set his chopsticks down and stared at some distant point, as if his thoughts had drifted back to a very old time. His silence stretched on, heavy enough that Hawa did not dare say another word. She understood that beneath that calm exterior, a powerful undercurrent was stirring. After a long while, Hung finally spoke, admitting slowly that he felt deeply conflicted. His voice was low, no longer as steady as usual. He said he still could not forgive the fact that his mother had abandoned him and Tieu-san for decades. It was not merely a physical absence, but a long, aching void throughout their childhood, a lack that no apology could ever easily make up for. Hung went on to say that he had once believed he had come to terms with that past, that he had grown accustomed to living without a mother by his side. But now, with her sudden reappearance and the resurfacing of old memories, he realized that nothing had truly been closed as he had thought. His emotions were more conflicted than ever. Part of him wanted to preserve their current life, to protect Tieu-san from unnecessary upheaval. Yet another part was shaken by the reality that she had not only sought him out, but had also come looking for Tieu-san, hoping to mend everything that had been broken. Hung stopped there, saying no more. His words lingered in the air, unanswered, without a clear direction forward. Hawa sat quietly beside him, listening to every word, keenly aware that this story was far from over, and that what lay ahead was still impossible to predict. Not long after that, the biological mother also sought out Tieu. The meeting came far sooner than Tieu had ever imagined, more sudden than anything she had experienced throughout her life. When the woman appeared and slowly revealed her true identity, Tieu could barely comprehend what was happening. She only caught fragments of familiar words that now carried an unbearably unfamiliar meaning: biological mother, years ago, left, regret. Each word echoed in her ears, leaving her mind blank and her heart pounding as if it were about to shatter. The truth was exposed too abruptly, too cruelly, and Tieu nearly collapsed on the spot. The mother she had believed to be long gone, the one she had silently remembered during her weakest moments, was still alive. And more painful than anything else was the fact that this very woman had been the one who chose to leave her when she was still so small, abandoning her to a childhood marked by absence and a life shaped by an emptiness she could never quite name. Tieu could not remember clearly whether she had heard everything that was said that day. She only remembered the icy chill spreading through her body, her hands trembling beyond control, and the woman's eyes, filled with longing and remorse, yet far too distant to be called familiar. The memories Tieu had pieced together over the years, the stories she had told herself about her mother, suddenly collapsed entirely. Overwhelmed by despair and confusion, Tieu did the only thing she could think of: she reached out to the one person she trusted most. She took out her phone, her hands shaking so badly she almost couldn't dial. When Hung's voice came through on the other end, all the emotions she had been suppressing burst out uncontrollably. Her voice trembled, choked with sobs, her words broken and caught in her throat. She didn't need to say much, just a few fragmented sentences were enough for Hung to understand how terrible her state was. The meeting between the two siblings took place in silence. They sat facing each other, close in distance yet separated by a pain that had just been given a name. Tieu lowered her head, her hands clenched tightly together, her shoulders shaking in waves. Tears streamed down endlessly, impossible to stop, as if all the wounds buried for so many years had finally found a way to break free. Tieu cried, a lot. She did not blame Hung, never once thought of holding her brother responsible. She understood that he, too, had been just a child back then, also abandoned, also carrying losses no smaller than hers. But the pain of being left behind, the feeling of being rejected from such a young age, was something Tieu had never truly overcome. Now, with the truth laid bare, all those long-suppressed emotions erupted, leaving her unable to hold herself together. Hung said very little. He sat beside her quietly, wrapping his arms around his sister and letting her lean into him as she cried. That embrace could not erase Tieu pain, but it was the only thing he could offer in that moment. Inside Hung, guilt and helplessness intertwined until they felt suffocating. He wondered whether he had truly protected his sister, whether the years they had lived together were enough to make up for what they had both lost. Hung listened as Tieu spoke, even when her words were repeatedly broken by sobs. She told him about the meeting, about what the woman had said, about how she felt hearing that truth. Every sentence was like a slow, deliberate cut to Hung's heart, as he realized that his sister's pain ran even deeper than he had ever imagined. Their conversation lasted a long time. Not every moment was filled with words, sometimes there were only heavy silences, broken by sighs and quiet crying. Time passed slowly, as if both of them needed each passing minute to face the truth that had suddenly descended upon them, to slowly untangle the chaos of emotions inside. After that long exchange, when the tears had gradually dried, when the emotions were no longer as explosive as at the beginning, the siblings finally sat still, facing reality together. What had happened could not be undone. Their biological mother had appeared, the past had been dragged back into the present, and their lives could no longer continue unchanged. And it was in that heavy yet sincere atmosphere that a silent understanding formed between them. No grand declarations were needed. They both knew they could not keep running away. After everything that had been said, the two siblings began moving toward a shared decision, fully aware that the road ahead would be anything but easy. Hung and Tieu arranged to meet their biological mother. This time, the meeting no longer carried the confusion or emotional breakdowns of before. Both siblings had had time to think, to face their own pain and to ask themselves what they truly needed. When they entered the familiar setting of the meeting, Hung and Tieu sat down with a much calmer state of mind. Their eyes no longer avoided contact, nor were they filled with resentment. Instead, there was the composure of people who had chosen to look directly at the truth, even when that truth was deeply uncomfortable. This time, there were no fragile tears. No choked voices or uncontrollable sobs. Hung spoke first. His voice was low and measured, each word carefully chosen. He said that for decades, even without their biological mother by their side, he and Tieu had still grown up, still survived, and still built lives of their own. They had lacked many things, had suffered, had questioned why they were left behind, but in the end, they had kept going. Not because they did not need a mother, but because they were forced to learn how to live without her. Tieu sat beside him and nodded quietly. When she spoke, her voice no longer trembled as it had before, yet it still carried a deep sadness. She said that her years of growing up had not been easy, but she had her brother, she had people who stood by her, relationships built on sincerity. Those were the things that allowed her to stand where she was today. She did not deny the existence of her biological mother, but she also could not deny that her life had taken a completely different direction long ago. Both siblings spoke of how they now had families, people who genuinely loved them, not out of obligation or blood ties, but because of bonds formed over time. These were relationships that had walked with them through hardship, shared joy, and sorrow alike. Hung mentioned Hawa and the life he was striving to protect. Tieu spoke of those who had always been there for her, quietly supporting her during her weakest moments. They both made one thing very clear. They did not want their present lives to be turned upside down by their mother's belated return. Their words carried no harsh accusations, but they were firm enough to establish the boundaries Hung and Tieu had set. They did not want the past to continue controlling the present, nor did they want the stability they had built over so many years to be disrupted by emotions that came too late. Their biological mother listened in silence. At first, she tried to remain composed, but as she listened, her restlessness and anguish became increasingly visible. As soon as Hung and Tieu finished speaking, she responded urgently. She tried to persuade them, her voice filled with desperation. She explained the circumstances of the past once more, speaking of the difficulties and pressures that had driven her to leave her children. She said it was the greatest mistake of her life, that not a single day had passed in all those years without her being truly at peace. She apologized repeatedly. The apologies came again and again, as if saying them enough times could erase the lost years. She said that now she only wished for a chance, no matter how small, to make amends, to be able to call them her children once more without distance between them. When her explanations no longer seemed enough to move them, the biological mother shifted direction. She spoke about her current life, about the wealth she now possessed. She said she was very rich now, that she could give Hung, Tieu and even Hawa a large sum of money. She emphasized that she was willing to give them everything she had, as long as they accepted her, as long as she could be by their side as a mother. Those words echoed heavily in the already tense space, making the atmosphere even more suffocating. Money, wealth, material things, the very things that had once been the reason she left them, were now being offered as compensation. Hung looked straight at the woman before him, his gaze steady and unmoved. He refused clearly. His voice was not raised, not harsh, but firm enough to leave no room for misunderstanding. Tieu San spoke immediately afterward, just as resolute. She said that money was not what they were seeking in this meeting, and it was not something that could resolve the pain they had carried for decades. Both Hung and Tieu San understood one thing very clearly. Money cannot make up for years of abandonment. Material wealth cannot replace a mother's love that was lost. Their refusal was spoken calmly, but beneath that calm lay a long and painful inner struggle. No one said anything more after that. The atmosphere among the three grew heavy and subdued, as though each person was left facing their own thoughts, and the meeting ended with many things still left unsaid. Despite being firmly rejected, the biological mother showed no intention of backing down. After Hung and Tieu San's refusals, she did not lose her temper, nor did she break down in tears as she had before. Instead, she fell silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on the two siblings as if trying to imprint every feature, every expression into her memory. That silence stretched on, heavy enough to make the air around them feel frozen. Then she spoke slowly, her voice no longer trembling, no longer overflowing with raw emotion. She said that in this world, she had only two biological children. For decades, even with wealth, status, and a life that appeared complete on the surface, she had never truly felt whole inside. Everything she had achieved could not fill the void left by losing her children. She admitted that at her age now, she no longer needed money, nor did she crave fame or anyone's approval. The only thing she desired, the only thing that kept her going, was to be reunited with her children. These words were spoken in a tone entirely different from before. There was no longer the weakness of pleading, no longer the openly exposed remorse. Instead, it was the voice of someone who had convinced herself that this desire was something she deserved, regardless of the cost. She said she had waited far too long, wasted too many years in regret, and this time, she would not let go so easily. She stated clearly that no matter what it took, she would not give up. The sentence was delivered slowly but firmly, more like a declaration than a request. Hung and Tieu San were left stunned. They did not respond immediately, but both of them sensed a distinct shift in their mother's attitude. Her gaze no longer carried the hope of forgiveness or the wish for understanding. In its place was a cold, rigid determination, one that sent a chill down the spine of anyone who met it. This was no longer the look of a mother trying to mend broken bonds, but the look of someone who had set a goal and was prepared to pursue it to the very end. That look unsettled Hung deeply. He realized that this meeting was not merely a conversation meant to establish boundaries. What had just been said felt like only the beginning of something far more complicated. Sitting beside him, Tieu San unconsciously clenched her hands, a nameless anxiety rising in her chest. She did not know what their biological mother might do next, but she understood that the determination she had just witnessed was not empty words. The meeting ended in a heavy silence, with no further exchange. When the three of them left, each carried their own private thoughts. For Hung and Tieu San, it was a mix of steadfast resolve and quiet unease about what lay ahead. For the biological mother, it was a calculating silence, as though nothing had truly come to an end. What followed that meeting remains uncertain. No one knows what methods the biological mother might use to force Hung and Tieu San to accept her. No one can be sure whether the peaceful life Hawa and Tieu San are living can withstand such relentless determination. And no one yet has an answer to what Hung will have to do to protect his family, now that the past he believed buried has returned, fierce and unforgiving. Everything still lies ahead, suspended between choices and unresolved conflicts, opening the door to a tense and uncertain next chapter of the story.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay lại kênh của mình. Nay thì mình đang làm video về tập tiếp theo của câu chuyện của Hùng và Lythieuca nhé mọi người. Thì mình đang ở tập 4 và 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 mình đang ở tập 4 Cảm ơn mọi người rất là nhiều vì đã theo dõi và ủng hộ cho kênh của mình nhé mọi người.